I told a girl I had never held a real conversation with. "Don't be afraid. I'm here." And then I put my body between her and a gun. 3 weeks earlier, the biggest decision of my day was whether Table 6's coffee could wait until the man at Table 9 stopped crying quietly into his eggs. My name is Iris Calloway. I was 26 years old. I worked the 6 to close shift at the Anchor Bell Diner on Cutwater Street, and according to the dock boys who drank there after their shifts, I was barely an omega at all. That was the joke. Weak scent, no visible heat cycles, nothing sweet enough to notice from more than a foot away. Minnow, they called me, because I was thin and quiet and slipped through a room without anyone marking where I'd gone. I had stopped correcting them around the time I stopped expecting anyone to. Some designations announced themselves. Mine had always been a rumor. The diner sat 4 blocks from the water, close enough that on quiet nights I could hear the cranes groaning over the container yards. The whole skyline of Draven Maritime lit up gold and merciless against the dark. Everyone in that city knew the name Draven the way they knew which streets not to walk after midnight. Callista Draven ran the docks, the shipping lanes, half the legitimate trade moving through the harbor, and, depending on who you asked in a low enough voice, a fair share of what wasn't legitimate at all. They called her the Iron Tide, not because she was loud. Because she wasn't. Because when the Iron Tide came in, nothing that had been standing on the shore was standing after. I had never met her. I had seen her twice, from a distance, stepping out of a black car with her collar up and her security fanned around her like a held breath. I did not think about her more than that. I had rent and a debt collector who called on Tuesdays, and a father's tackle box full of gauze and suture strips that I kept behind the counter and restocked out of habit nobody had asked me to keep. The tackle box wasn't for fishing. My father, Thomas Calloway, had been a dock medic for 12 years before I was born, patching up longshoremen who split their hands on winch cable and men who went into the water and came out blue. He died in a warehouse fire when I was 14. Faulty wiring, the report said. I had grown up around the smell of antiseptic and the sound of his voice walking me through pressure points on my own wrist like a bedtime story. Airway, breathing, circulation. Count the exits before you count anything else. I still did it without meaning to, clocked every door the second I walked into a room, filed people by which hand they favored, which pockets sat heavier. Old habit. Useless one, I thought, in a diner that had never once needed it. The bell over the door rang at 4 that afternoon, 3 weeks before the gun. And Ren Draven walked in wearing a school uniform 2 sizes too structured for a girl who ate pie with her elbows on the counter. "They lost me again," she said, sliding onto the stool like she owned it. "Rourke's going to have an aneurysm. Rourke should learn to count faster than 17-year-olds can run," I said, already reaching for the lemon meringue, because she asked for it every time and never once had to ask out loud anymore. Ren grinned at that, delighted with herself in the specific way of someone who has spent her whole life being watched too closely and has finally found 45 minutes where nobody was. She was Callista Draven's only sister, half her age, guarded around the clock by men twice her size, and as far as I could tell, the only person in that entire empire who was allowed to be young. She talked about everything and nothing. A boy in her history class, a dog she wasn't allowed to have, her sister's unbearable habit of reading contracts at the dinner table. She never once talked about being a Draven like it was a cage. To her, it was just weather. To me, listening, it was the only window I had into a world sealed tight against people like me. "You're the only one who talks to me like I'm not going to break," she told me once, mouth full of meringue. "Everyone else just watches me like I'm made of glass." "You're not glass," I said. "You're just loud and small." Different problem. She laughed loud enough that the cook rang the bell twice just to see what was funny. I did not know, that afternoon, that I would spend the rest of my life grateful for a stolen 45 minutes of pie. I only knew that when the bell rang again 10 minutes later and 2 men walked in wearing coats too heavy for the weather, my hands went still on the counter before my head caught up to why. One of them favored his right side. The other hadn't looked at the menu once, only at Ren, only at the door behind her, counting the same exits I had already counted 12 times since she sat down. My father's voice moved through me, calm as water. Something is wrong before you can name what. Ren, I said quietly, not looking away from the men. Finish your pie in the back with me, right now. She looked at me like I'd grown a second head. It's fine, Rourke's probably 2 minutes out now, I said, and something in my voice must have carried, because for the first time since I'd known her, Ren Draven stopped arguing. The man on the right reached inside his coat, and I understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, that I had counted the exits for nothing, because there wasn't going to be time to use any of them. The counter was between us and them, 4 feet of scarred laminate and a napkin dispenser, and I put my hand flat on Ren's shoulder and pushed her down behind it, in the same motion I used to hear my father describe as, get low, get small, get behind something that isn't you. The first shot took out the pie case. Glass went everywhere, sugar bright and glittering, and somewhere under the ringing in my ears, I heard Ren say my name like a question. I did not think about what I did next. I only remember standing, because standing put me between the muzzle and the girl crouched at my knees, and I remember saying, in a voice that did not sound like mine, "Don't be afraid, I'm here," right before the second shot found me instead of her. It did not feel like fire, the way people say. It felt like being shoved by something enormous and very cold. And then the floor came up faster than I expected, and the last thing I saw clearly before the world went soft at the edges was Ren's face, white and furious and 17, screaming a name into a phone that was not mine to hear. "Callista, Callista, get here now." I woke up flat on my back, with my own blood soaking through my shirt and my hands already moving before my mind was, pressing 2 fingers hard against the wound below my collarbone, the way my father had drilled into me 100 times over 100 kitchen table lessons I never thought I'd need. Pressure first. Pressure buys time. Somewhere close, glass crunched under boots, and a voice I had never heard before, low and controlled in a way that made the whole room go quiet around it, said one sentence that I would remember for the rest of my life. "Whoever did this," Callista Draven said, "just declared war on the wrong family." She smelled like frostbitten pine and iron shavings, sharp enough to cut through the copper stink of my own blood, and when she crouched over me and put her hand flat against mine on the wound, her palm was shaking, just slightly, in a way I did not think a woman like that was supposed to shake at all. "Stay with me," she said. Not a request. An order given to someone she had already, somehow, decided was hers to keep. "You don't get to close your eyes yet." I meant to tell her I wasn't planning on it. What came out instead was Ren's name. A question, and the last thing I registered before the dark took me all the way under was Callista Draven's voice, cracked open for exactly 1 syllable before she caught it and locked it back down. "She's safe," Callista said. "Because of you. Now stay." The floor of the anchor bell disappeared under me, and the black car I had once watched from a careful distance became the last thing I remember, its door open like a mouth, swallowing me whole into a world I had never once believed had room for someone like me. I woke up twice before I woke up for good. The first time was fluorescent light and the smell of antiseptic laid over something colder and more expensive than the antiseptic at any clinic I'd ever been able to afford. The second time was Wren's voice, hoarse, saying my name like she was testing whether I would answer. The third time I opened my eyes and kept them open, and a man built like a doorway was standing at the foot of the bed with his arms crossed, watching me the way you'd watch something you hadn't decided yet whether to trust. "You're in the Draven private wing," he said. "St. Holloway's. 3 days. You lost a lot of blood and most of your left shoulder's soft tissue, but the surgeon says you'll keep the arm." He paused. "I'm Rourke, head of the ladies' security. The lady you nearly died catching a bullet for is currently refusing to eat until someone tells her you're conscious." "Tell her," I said. My throat felt like sandpaper. "Tell her I'm fine." "She doesn't need. She's not asking whether you're fine," Rourke said. "She's asking whether you're breathing." Different question. With her, he studied me a moment longer. Unreadable. In 15 years working for that family, I've never seen her leave the building during a live threat assessment. She left it twice in 3 days, once for her sister. Once, apparently, for a waitress. He said the word waitress like he was testing its weight against something he didn't yet have language for. Wren got to me before Callista did, bursting through the door in a hospital robe of her own that she was clearly not supposed to be out of bed to wear, and threw both arms around my good shoulder hard enough to make me hiss. "You pushed me down," she said into my collarbone, furious and grateful in the same breath. "You could have run. You put yourself in front of a gun for someone you barely know." "I knew you well enough," I said. "You eat your pie crust last. That's practically a friendship." She laughed, wet and strangled, and did not let go for a long time. When she finally pulled back, her eyes went past me to the door, and something in her face changed, softened and braced, both at once, and I understood, before I even turned my head, that Callista Draven had arrived. She stood in the doorway the way I imagined she stood in every doorway, like the room owed her an accounting before she'd step inside it. Dark coat, dark eyes, a stillness to her that read as control until you looked closely enough to see it was closer to restraint. A woman holding something very large, very tightly, so it wouldn't get loose. Her scent reached me before she did, frost-bitten pine and iron shavings, the same smell that had cut through the blood and the panic on the diner floor, and beneath the fear it triggered, something in my chest turned over, warm and unwelcome and entirely new. "Wren," Callista said. "Give us the room." Wren opened her mouth to argue, looked at her sister's face, and closed it again. She squeezed my hand once before she left, and then it was just the two of us, and the low hum of machines, and 4 feet of hospital tile that felt somehow smaller than the counter that had stood between me and a gunman 3 days before. "You should be resting," I said, because the silence had gone on a beat too long and I did not know what else to do with it. "I should," Callista agreed, and did not move. "I've read the security footage report 11 times. You clocked the threat before my sister's own detail did. You put yourself between a loaded weapon and a Draven with no training, no weapon, and no reason to." Her jaw worked once. "Why?" She was scared, I said. "Someone should be there when you're scared." Someone was, for me. Once I didn't have to think about it. Something moved behind Callista's eyes, quick and complicated, gone before I could name it. "Most people think about it," she said quietly. "That's the whole problem with most people." "I'm not most people," I said. "I'm barely a person to most of your city. Ask anyone at the docks. They call me Minnow." "I heard," Callista said, and for the first time something like anger flickered across her face, banked and controlled but unmistakably there. "I intend to have a conversation with whoever started that." She stepped closer, and her scent thickened in the small room until it was the only thing I could smell, besides my own blood-thinned sweat, warm barley sugar, and salt-cured linen, apparently, though it took her saying it out loud a moment later for me to understand that was what she was tasting on the air. "You smell like sugar and salt water," she said, almost to herself. "I don't know why that surprises me. Is that a bad thing?" "No," Callista said. "It's the first thing in 3 days that hasn't smelled like blood." She looked at me for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped into something more formal, more careful, a woman choosing every word before she spent it. "You saved my sister's life. I don't let debts like that sit unpaid. When you're discharged, you'll come to the estate, recover properly, full security, full medical care, for as long as you need it." "That's not necessary," I said, though even as I said it, I was doing the math I always did. Rent, the collector, the shifts I'd already missed, the shoulder that wasn't going to let me carry a coffee pot for weeks. I have a job. An apartment. A life you don't need to rearrange. Your apartment building had a structural fire inspection fail 8 months ago that was never repaired, Callista said flatly. Your landlord raised your rent twice this year without required notice. Your job pays you $4 under the legal minimum for tipped staff in this state. And 3 nights ago, 2 of my rival's men walked into your workplace armed, looking for my sister, and found you instead. She held my gaze, unflinching. I am not asking you to accept charity, Iris Calloway. I am telling you that you bled on my floor for my family, and I intend to make sure it costs you nothing else. I opened my mouth to argue again, and found, for the first time in longer than I could remember, that I didn't actually want to. "Fine," I said, "but I'm not decorative. If I'm under your roof, I want something to do. I don't do well with empty hands." Something that might have been the ghost of a smile crossed her face. "There and gone." "Noted," she said. "Now sleep." "That's an order, not a request, and before you tell me you don't take orders," a pause, precise, almost warm, "I've read your service history at the docks. Your father trained every junior medic on that waterfront for a decade. I imagine you already know exactly how to follow one." She left before I could answer, and I lay in the dark of that unfamiliar room, with her scent still hanging in the air, and my father's whistle, the small dented brass one he used to blow for all clear, sitting cold against my collarbone, where I'd worn it on a cord since the day they buried him, and thought, with a clarity that frightened me more than the gunshot had, that I had just crossed a threshold I was never going to be able to walk back through. The Draven estate sat on a bluff above the harbor, all pale stone and glass, and a silence so complete it felt engineered, and I understood within my first hour there that I had traded one kind of invisibility for another. At the diner, no one saw me because I wasn't worth seeing. Here, no one saw me because they had already decided what I was, a stray the iron tide had taken in out of guilt, a temporary guest who would be quietly, politely removed the moment the debt felt settled. Nobody said that to my face, except one man. Desmond Vane found me on my 3rd morning, sitting in the East Garden with my arm in its sling, and looked at me the way you'd look at something tracked in on a shoe. "You're the waitress," he said. He was Callista's cousin, I would learn later, her father's brother's son, second in line to everything she controlled and visibly, permanently furious about the distance between second and first. The one who got shot playing hero. "I'm the one who got shot, yes," I said. "The hero part's your interpretation. An omega with no presentation worth the name, working 3 jobs to make rent, suddenly living in the Draven house because she happened to be standing in the right doorway at the right time." He tilted his head, cataloging me. "Do you know what we call that in my business?" Enlighten me. Opportunity, Desmond said. I'd be careful how long you enjoy it. Cousins who don't know their place tend to find the door eventually. I imagine strays find it faster. I thought of a dozen answers. I settled on the one my father would have approved of. I didn't ask for a place, I said. I asked for nothing at all. That's usually the difference between people like you and people like me. He didn't like that. I watched it land, watched the muscle in his jaw tighten before he turned and walked away without another word, and I understood, the way you understand weather changing before the first drop falls, that I had just made an enemy who mattered. The estate itself, though, betrayed Callista in ways her face never did. My second night, exhausted and aching and too proud to ask for help I didn't strictly need, I found a tray outside my door at 9 o'clock exactly. Soup, bread, and beside it, unmistakably, a slice of lemon meringue pie, the crust crimped in the exact lazy pattern the Anchor Bell's baker used, and no one else in the city bothered to replicate. I hadn't told anyone in this house that lemon meringue was the one thing that made a bad shift bearable. I had told Wren once, in passing, weeks before any of this happened. She remembers everything, I thought, and something in my chest cracked open a little wider than I wanted it to. 2 nights later, I found her in the estate kitchen at 11, standing at the counter in shirt sleeves, with her sleeves shoved up, glaring at a saucepan like it had personally wronged her. "You're supposed to be resting your shoulder," Callista said without turning around, somehow already aware I was in the doorway. "You're supposed to have a staff of 40 for exactly this reason," I said. "What are you doing?" "Wren mentioned you liked the pie," Callista said. I asked the kitchen for the recipe. It requires a double boiler for the filling, apparently, which I did not own until this evening. She turned, and there was a smear of lemon custard along her jaw, and the single most powerful woman on the waterfront looked, for one unguarded second, entirely lost. I laughed before I could stop myself. "You're burning it, I am aware," Callista said, with the particular dignity of someone refusing to acknowledge failure while standing directly inside it. "Move," I said, and she did, without argument, which surprised me more than the pie did. I took the whisk from her, adjusted the heat, showed her the fold she'd been missing, and for 10 minutes the most feared woman in the city stood at my shoulder in a warm kitchen, watching my hands instead of watching the door, and neither of us said anything that needed saying. "Why does this matter to you?" I asked finally, not looking up from the pan. "The pie. Any of this. I'm a waitress who bled on your floor. You've already paid whatever debt you think you owe. It isn't a debt anymore," Callista said, and her voice had dropped into that low, careful register I was starting to recognize as the sound of her telling the truth. "I don't cook for debts. I cook for." She stopped herself, visibly, and I watched her decide not to finish the sentence. "For what?" "Ask me again when I'm less likely to say something I can't take back," Callista said, and reached past me to steady the pan, her hand brushing mine. And neither of us moved away as fast as either of us should have. I felt the warmth of it travel up my arm and settle somewhere behind my ribs, and beneath the sugar and the custard and the faint char of her failed first attempt, I caught her scent again, thick in the small kitchen, frost-bitten pine gone soft at the edges, like something cold learning, slowly, how to hold heat. It was Mrs. Aldous, the housekeeper who had run that estate since before Callista was born, who finally told me what no one else would say out loud. I found her in the east sitting room a week later, polishing a photograph frame that had clearly been polished 1,000 times before, and when I asked, gently, whether the woman in the photo was who I thought she was, the old woman's hand stilled. "Elena," Mrs. Aldous said. "Elena Marsh." She was the finance officer for Draven Maritime, sharp as broken glass, twice as pretty, and the only person alive who could make Callista laugh out loud in a room full of people. She set the frame down carefully. They were to be married in the spring. 9 years ago this June, Alina found irregularities in the harbor manifests. Skimmed cargo, falsified weights, money moving somewhere it shouldn't. She told Callista she was going to report it to the board. Mrs. Aldis's mouth thinned. 3 nights later, her car went into the harbor off Pier 9. Ruled an accident. Callista has never once believed that, and Callista has never once been able to prove otherwise. That's why she runs everything so tightly, I said slowly. Why nothing gets past her. That's why she stopped letting anyone close enough to matter, Mrs. Aldis corrected. Until, apparently, a girl who bled on her diner floor for a child that wasn't even hers. She looked at me with an old woman's frank appraisal, unhurried and unashamed. I haven't seen her cook in this kitchen in 9 years, child. I'd think carefully about what you intend to do with that. I was still turning that over 3 nights later when Callista found me on the east terrace at midnight, unable to sleep, my father's whistle turning over and over between my fingers the way it did when my thoughts wouldn't settle. You should be asleep, she said, the same words as the first night, softer now, worn smooth by repetition. So should you, I said. What's your excuse? I don't sleep well in this house, Callista admitted, surprising me with the honesty of it. Too many rooms Elena used to be in. She looked at the whistle in my hand. Your father's? He blew it for all clear, I said. Whenever a job went wrong on the docks, a man overboard, a fire, a crush injury, everyone braced until they heard it. It meant the worst was over. I kept it after he died. I don't know why. It's not like it means anything now. It means you're still listening for it, Callista said quietly, waiting for someone to tell you the worst is over. I looked up at her, startled by how exactly she'd named it. Is that what you're waiting for too? Callista was quiet for a long moment. The harbor lights spread gold and shivering below us, her scent settling warm and close around me in the cold night air. I don't know how to want things anymore, she said finally. Wanting things got Elena killed. It's simpler to run an empire than to want a person. Empires don't drown. I'm not asking you to want an empire, I said. My heart loud enough I was certain she could hear it. Don't be afraid, I added, before I could stop myself. The same 4 words I'd said to Ren on the diner floor, meant differently now, meant for her. I'm here. Something in Callista's face broke open, just slightly, just for a moment, and she reached out and tucked a strand of hair back from my face, with a gentleness that did not match anything the city said about her. Tell me to stop, she said, low, giving me the exit before she'd even taken the step, and I will. Don't stop, I said. She didn't kiss me that night. She pressed her forehead to mine instead, breathing me in like something she'd been starving for and was terrified to swallow too fast. And we stood like that on the terrace until the cold finally drove us both inside. And I understood that whatever this was, it had already stopped being simple gratitude for either of us. The dinner 3 nights later was meant to be nothing, a quarterly board gathering, the kind of formal function I was told I could skip if I preferred. I went anyway, because Ren asked me to, and because some stubborn part of me had grown tired of being talked about in rooms I wasn't allowed into. Desmond was seated 4 chairs down, and it took him exactly 11 minutes to find his opening. I'm curious, he said, loud enough to carry, smiling with all his teeth, how a diner waitress affords the wardrobe for an evening like this. Charity, I assume. Or is the arrangement more personal than that? The table went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when everyone is waiting to see who bleeds first. It's called a loan I intend to repay, I said evenly, same as anyone starting from nothing does. Unlike you, I've never had a family name to hide behind instead of a work ethic. A ripple of suppressed laughter went down the table, quickly swallowed. Desmond's face went tight and red. An Omega who barely presented, lecturing me on work ethic, he said, sharper now, the mask slipping. How quaint. Tell me, Iris. Does it bother you that half this room still isn't sure you registered a designation at all? Or have you simply stopped caring what real Omegas think of you? The silence after that was total. I felt heat rise in my face, old shame dragged up from 100 jeering nights at the diner counter, and I opened my mouth to answer, and Callista spoke before I could. Desmond. Her voice was very quiet, and every person at that table went still at the sound of it. You will apologize to my guest. Now, and completely, or you will finish this dinner explaining to the board why you're no longer welcome at this table at all. Callista, I only meant, I know exactly what you meant, Callista said. She had not raised her voice once, and it was somehow more frightening than if she had. I have watched this city mock people for what they can't control for 34 years, and I have said nothing more times than I'm proud of. I am done saying nothing. Her eyes never left his. Iris Calloway put her body between an armed man and my sister without hesitation. She has more worth in one heartbeat than you have shown this family in a decade. Apologize, or leave. Desmond's jaw worked. He looked around the table, found no allies waiting, and forced out 3 flat words before shoving back his chair and walking out without waiting to be dismissed. Rourke, seated near the head of the table, caught my eye across the silence and gave me the smallest, driest nod, the closest thing to approval I'd seen from him yet. In 15 years, his expression seemed to say, I have never seen her do that for anyone. Under the table, Callista's hand found mine, and she laced her fingers through it in front of every person who mattered in her world, and did not let go for the rest of the meal. The lockdown came 4 nights later, a little after 2 in the morning, a siren I had never heard before dragging me out of sleep, and Rourke's voice through the intercom flat and urgent, perimeter breach, east gate, all residents to the safe room immediately. I found Callista already in the corridor, barefoot, a gun in her hand and her control fractured in a way I had never seen. And when Ren wasn't in her room, wasn't answering, wasn't anywhere, something in Callista's face went past fear into a place with no name at all. We found her, 11 agonizing minutes later, hiding exactly where a smart 17-year-old would hide, in the old laundry chute off the east wing, having heard the alarm and moved before anyone could reach her, safe and shaking and furious at herself for being scared. The breach itself turned out to be nothing. In the end, a delivery truck's credentials expired, a guard slow to verify, the kind of failure that happens in even the tightest systems. But by the time Rourke confirmed it, Callista and I were locked together in the reinforced safe room 2 floors down, the door sealed on protocol until an all clear that hadn't come yet, and 11 minutes of not knowing whether Ren was alive had stripped every wall Callista owned down to nothing. I can't lose her, Callista said, sitting on the floor of that steel room with her back against the wall, her hands still shaking around the gun she finally set down. I can't lose anyone else. I built all of this, she gestured, meaning the docks, the empire, the whole gleaming machine of her life, so nothing could touch what was mine again, and it didn't work. It never works. Alina had every protection I could buy, and she still went into that harbor. I sat down beside her, close enough that our shoulders touched, close enough to smell frostbitten pine gone raw and unguarded. You can't armor everyone you love into safety, I said quietly. I don't think that's how loving people works. I think you just stand in front of them when it counts and hope it's enough, and it usually is. It wasn't enough for Elena. No, I agreed. But it was enough for Ren tonight. And it was enough for me 3 weeks ago, because someone loved her enough to raise her right. And someone else loved me enough to teach me what to do when the worst came. I took her hand, the way she'd taken mine at that dinner table, and held it. You're not made of iron, Callista. You just decided a long time ago that if you looked like you were, nothing could hurt what was underneath. I understand that. I've been doing something like it my whole life. But you don't have to do it with me. Callista turned her head, and in the low emergency light of that sealed room, her eyes were wet, unguarded in a way the city that feared her would never believe possible. I don't know what I'm allowed to want from you, she said, low and raw. I don't know how to want something and not lose it. Ask me, I said. That's usually how it starts. She looked at me for a long moment, and I watched her decide, watched 34 years of armor make one small, deliberate crack. Can I kiss you? Callista said. Not a demand. A door, held open, mine to walk through or not. Yes, I said. She kissed me slowly, carefully, like something she was terrified to break, and I felt her hand come up to cup my jaw with a tenderness that undid me faster than any of the danger of the last month had managed. When she finally pulled back, her forehead resting against mine, her breath unsteady, the intercom crackled to life above us with Rourke's voice announcing the all clear, and Callista laughed, low and disbelieving, against my mouth. Of course, she said. Of course it ends the second I finally— It doesn't end, I said. It's barely started. We stayed on that floor another minute anyway, just breathing each other in, before duty pulled her back to her feet and her sister, and the 1,000 things a woman like her could never fully set down. But something had shifted in that steel room that no lockdown protocol would ever undo, and we both knew it. The confession, when it finally came whole, came 2 weeks later in the estate's kitchen again, this time with no burnt custard between us. I told her about my father, not just the fire, but the years before it, the way he'd talk me through triage while we washed dishes, the last thing he ever said to me, "Don't panic, Minnow, panic wastes time you don't have." I told her about the years since, the debt collector, the landlord, the nights I went hungry so the rent got paid, the slow way the world had convinced me I was worth exactly as much as it decided to give me, which was never very much at all. Callista listened the way she did everything, completely, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time before she spoke. Your father worked the docks, she said slowly. Thomas Calloway. I know that name. I pulled every file on the warehouse fire that killed him, years ago, when I first took over operations. A routine audit of old incidents, nothing more, I thought. Her face had gone very still. The fire started in Warehouse 11. Faulty wiring, the report said. Iris, that warehouse was inspected and cleared 6 weeks before the fire. I remember because I signed the inspection order myself, as a favor to my father, back when I still trusted every signature that crossed my desk without question. Cold moved through me, slow and total. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't think it was an accident, Callista said. I think whoever falsified those inspection records is the same person who's been falsifying manifests on this waterfront for over a decade. I think it's the same operation Elena found irregularities in 6 years later, 3 nights before her car went into the harbor. Her jaw tightened, something old and furious surfacing behind her eyes. I think, Iris, that your father and the woman I was going to marry may have died for exactly the same reason, 12 years and 6 years apart, and I think I finally understand why someone wanted my sister dead in a diner 4 weeks ago instead of somewhere quieter. Because she was getting close to something, I said slowly. Or you were. I've spent 9 years chasing a ghost that kept slipping just out of reach every time I got close, Callista said. I think the ghost has a name, and I think I've had dinner with him every month for years. Neither of us said Desmond's name out loud. We didn't need to. It sat in the room between us like something already confirmed, and Callista reached across the counter and took my hand, and for a moment we simply held on to each other, two people who had both been orphaned by the same slow-moving cruelty without ever knowing it, until her phone buzzed once, sharp, on the counter between us. She read the message, and her whole body went rigid. Rourke, she said, voice gone flat and cold in a way I hadn't heard since the diner floor. Wren's evening tutor never arrived, her phone's going straight to voicemail. Her last location ping was 40 minutes ago, near the old harbor warehouses. She was already moving, already reaching for her coat, her calm cracking down the center. She's gone. The warehouse district at night was a maze of rusted containers and dead sodium lights, and Callista moved through it like a woman who had walked it 1,000 times in nightmares and never once found what she was looking for. I kept pace beside her, my father's whistle cold against my collarbone, my heart hammering a rhythm that had nothing to do with the cold. Rourke and 4 of his men fanned out ahead of us, silent, weapons drawn, and none of it felt real until we found the note pinned to Warehouse 11's rusted door with a knife through the paper. You took something from me 9 years ago and called it an audit, the note read, in handwriting I recognized instantly from the dinner table, tight and furious and finally, fully unmasked. I'm only taking back what's owed. Come alone, come armed, it makes no difference. By the time you read this, the board transfer papers are already filed. All that's left is deciding whether your sister watches you lose the company or whether she's simply gone before you get the chance to explain the difference. Callista's hand, holding the note, did not shake. Her voice, when she spoke, was colder than I had ever heard it. Rourke, seal every exit from this district. No one leaves who isn't one of ours. She turned to me, and for one unguarded second, the woman underneath the iron tide looked at me with something close to terror. Iris, I need you to stay back. This is not the diner. I can't. You can't lose anyone else, I said. I know. I'm not planning on being lost. But you need someone in there who knows how to keep a wounded person breathing long enough to matter, and right now that's me, not any of your men. I met her eyes, steady. Don't be afraid, I said, echoing her own words back to her from the terrace, from every night since. I'm here. Something in her face broke and rebuilt itself all at once, and she nodded, once, and we went in together. Warehouse 11 was exactly as it must have looked 12 years ago before the fire, cavernous and half-lit, crates stacked in rows like a maze built for exactly this purpose. We found Wren Zip tied to a support column in the center of the floor, gagged, eyes wide and furious, rather than frightened, and Desmond standing 3 feet away from her with a gun loose in his hand, and the particular calm of a man who has spent years rehearsing this exact moment. Cousin, Desmond said, almost pleasant, as if we'd arrived for tea. I wondered how long it would take you to bring the diner girl along. How fitting. Her father died in this exact building. Did you know that? I was 22. My first real job for this family was making sure a nosy doc medic never got the chance to report what he'd found in the inspection logs. His eyes slid to me, cold and satisfied. You're welcome, by the way, for the silence you've enjoyed your whole life, not knowing why he really died. Rage moved through me, hot and total, but I kept my hands steady, the way my father had taught me, the way 12 years of grief had taught me even harder. And Elena, I said, you killed her too. Elena was going to hand the board evidence that would have ended my career, And half the men who fed me for a decade, Desmond said, unbothered. I did what needed doing. I've done it twice already. A third time changes nothing. His gun drifted toward Ren, almost lazy. Callista, put your weapon on the ground, or your sister finds out exactly what her father found out 12 years before her. Callista's face had gone to stone, but her hands were already lowering, already surrendering the one advantage she had, because there was no version of her that would gamble Ren's life on a better angle. I understood, watching her, that she would let herself be destroyed before she let that happen. And I understood, in the same breath, that I could not let her. I had spent 12 years learning exactly how much force it took to disarm a panicked man on a dock in a storm, my father's hands guiding mine over and over until the motion lived somewhere below thought. Desmond's attention had drifted, fatally, fully onto Callista's surrendered weapon, and I moved before I let myself think about it, closing the distance and driving my good shoulder into his gun arm exactly as the shot went off. The bullet went wide, tearing through the meat of Callista's forearm instead of Ren's chest, and she made a sound, sharp and furious, and closed the remaining distance in half a second, driving Desmond to the ground with a force that had 9 years of grief behind it. Rourke's men flooded in behind us, weapons up, and it was over in less time than it takes to describe. Desmond pinned, disarmed. Screaming accusations that no longer mattered to anyone in the room, while I dropped to my knees in front of Ren and cut the zip ties with the folding knife I'd started carrying since the diner, my hands moving on instinct while my eyes found Callista, blood soaking dark through her sleeve. "Let me see it," I said, already reaching for her, already tearing a strip from my own shirt hem, my father's voice moving through me steady as a held breath. "Pressure first. Pressure buys time. You're not allowed to bleed out being brave in front of me. That's my job. Apparently, we're sharing it now," Callista said, breath ragged, but her eyes were fixed on mine, not the wound, trusting me completely with the thing that mattered more to her than her own blood. Desmond, pinned and furious on the concrete, spat something venomous at Rourke's boots, and Callista's uninjured hand curled into a fist so tight I heard her knuckles crack. I watched her rise, watched something in her face go cold and final, watched her cross toward her cousin with murder written plain across every line of her, and I caught her good arm before she reached him. "Don't," I said quietly. "Not like this. Not with your own hands, in the dark, where nobody sees what he did. He took your father-in-law's inspection, and your fiancé's life, and my father's death, and buried all of it in silence for 12 years. Don't let him disappear into silence one more time. Let everyone see it instead. Let the whole city watch what he is." Callista stood there, shaking with a fury I had never seen her allow herself to feel, and then, slowly, she let it go, let her hand uncurl, let the woman I had come to love win out over the queen the city had built her into. "The board," she said finally, voice steadying. "Every governor, every investor, every reporter who's ever printed a story about this family, I want them all in one room by morning." She looked down at Desmond with something colder than rage, contempt, final and complete. "You wanted to take this family apart in the dark. I'm going to take you apart in the light, where it can never be buried again." The boardroom at Draven Maritime headquarters had never held so many people at 7 in the morning, sunlight cutting hard and clean through floor-to-ceiling glass over the harbor, and I stood at Callista's side in a borrowed jacket over my bandaged shoulder while she laid 12 years of falsified inspection logs, skimmed manifests, and a recorded confession Rourke's men had pulled from Desmond before dawn out across the table like a hand of cards no one could argue with. My cousin murdered a dock medic named Thomas Calloway 12 years ago to hide a smuggling operation he'd been running under this family's name, Callista said, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. 6 years later, he murdered my fiancée, Elena Marsh, for finding the same evidence I'm holding now. 4 weeks ago, he sent armed men into a diner to kill my 17-year-old sister rather than risk being discovered, and the only reason she's alive to sit in the gallery today is because a waitress this city called Minnow put her own body between my sister and a bullet without a moment's hesitation. She let that land, let the whole room turn to look at me, and for the first time in my life, I did not shrink from being seen. I am not asking this board to trust my word. I am asking you to look at the evidence and ask yourselves how much longer silence like this was going to be allowed to run this waterfront. Desmond, seated between two of Rourke's men, said nothing at all. There was nothing left to say. By the time the board finished reviewing the files, the police were already waiting in the lobby, and the man who had killed my father and Callista's fiancé and nearly killed her sister walked out of that building in handcuffs while a room full of people who had once sneered at me over lemon meringue pie watched in silence. Rourke fell into step beside me as the room emptied, and for the first time since I'd known him, he offered his hand outright. In 15 years, he said, I have never once seen her risk everything for anyone. Not until you. He shook my hand. Firm, final, welcome to the family. Minnow, God help the rest of us. Callista found me afterward on the terrace outside the boardroom. The harbor spread gold and ordinary below us, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything at all. It's over, she said finally, disbelief still threaded through the words. 12 years, and it's actually over. It's over, I agreed. She turned to face me fully, and something in her posture had changed. Some final piece of armor set down and left on the boardroom floor behind her. I told you once I didn't know how to want things, Callista said. I know now. I want you. Not out of debt, not out of gratitude for my sister's life, though God knows I owe you both. I want you because you walked into a warehouse for me with a knife and a torn shirt and no weapon at all, and because you make pie taste like something worth burning your hands for, and because for the first time in 9 years I don't dread walking into my own kitchen. Her hand came up to cup my face, careful, deliberate. Tell me to stop, she said, the old permission, offered one last time, and I will. Don't stop, I said. She kissed me there on the terrace with the whole harbor watching, slow and sure, and when she finally drew back her mouth, moved to the curve of my neck. To the scent gland there, and she paused, her breath unsteady against my skin. May I? Callista asked. Low, every ounce of her restraint gathered into that single question, the claiming bite offered and not taken, hers to give and mine alone to grant. Yes, I said, no hesitation left in me at all. I'm yours. I have been since the diner floor. Her teeth found the gland gently, deliberately, a mark instead of a wound, and the bond snapped into place between us like something that had been waiting years to exist, warm and total and unshakable. Her frost-bitten pine settling into my blood the same way my barley sugar and salt linen scent bloomed fuller, stronger, no longer weak or barely there, but simply, finally, hers to answer. 6 months later, on a morning bright enough to hurt, Callista knelt in the same kitchen where she'd once burned a lemon custard for a woman she was too afraid to want, and opened a small worn box that had belonged to her grandmother. I built an empire out of not needing anyone, she said, her voice steadier than I had ever heard it, and still, somehow, trembling at the edges. You taught me the difference between not needing and not wanting. I want you, Iris Calloway. for every morning after this one. Marry me." "Yes," I said, before she'd even finished the last word, and Wren, watching from the doorway where she'd clearly been eavesdropping for the entire proposal, whooped loud enough to wake the whole East Wing. The wedding came in spring, on the harbor bluff, with the whole waterfront invited and half the city watching from boats anchored just offshore. Rourke stood at Callista's side in a suit that fit him like an apology, and Wren stood at mine, having declared herself unequivocally my bridesmaid the moment the engagement was announced, and Mrs. Aldous cried openly through both sets of vows. "I promise to stand where the danger is," I said, when it came my turn, my father's whistle worn now on a chain around Callista's wrist instead of my neck, given to her the night before as a promise she understood without needing it explained. "Don't be afraid," I told her, the old words worn smooth into something sacred between us. "I'm here. I'll always be here. I promise to stop being afraid to want you, out loud, every day, for the rest of my life," Callista said, her voice breaking once, gloriously, in front of everyone who had ever called her untouchable. "And I promise that no one who has ever made you feel small will ever be allowed near what we're building. Not again." The bite mark on my neck had faded into something soft and permanent, a bond neither of us had to explain to anyone who understood what it meant, and when Callista kissed me at the end of those vows, the whole bluff erupted in noise, and somewhere in the crowd I heard the old dock boys who'd once called me Minnow cheering loudest of all. The word turned finally, fully, into something tender instead of something small. A year on, Desmond's trial ended in a sentence long enough that the word appeal stopped appearing in any headline about him. The company he tried to steal was steadier than it had ever been, its books open, its harbor clean, run by a woman who had finally learned that strength and softness were not opposites after all. Wren finished her final year of school with a security detail she barely noticed anymore, having decided, loudly and often, that she intended to run the family's community outreach division herself one day, starting with fully funding trauma response training for every dock worker on the waterfront, in memory, she said, of a medic named Thomas Calloway, who never got the thanks he deserved. On a morning in early autumn, I stood at the kitchen window of the house Callista and I had chosen together, small and unglamorous by Draven standards, close enough to the water to hear the cranes at dawn, and watched the light come up gold over the harbor exactly the way it had the morning after everything finally settled. Callista came up behind me, wrapped both arms around my waist, and rested her chin on my shoulder, her scent warm now instead of cold, frost-bitten pine gone gentle, with a decade of grief finally set down. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, quiet, against my ear. "That I used to think being unseen kept me safe," I said. "I don't think that anymore." "No," Callista agreed, pressing a kiss below my ear, exactly over the mark she'd left there a year before. "Being seen is safer. It just takes the right person choosing to look." Outside, the harbor cranes groaned into motion, and somewhere down the water a ferry sounded its horn, low and steady, the closest thing this city had to an all-clear. I had spent most of my life waiting to hear one. I finally understood, standing in that kitchen with her arms around me and the whole gold morning laid out ahead of us, that the sound had never mattered nearly as much as who was standing beside you to hear it. Being invisible had never once kept anyone safe. It had only kept them alone. And love, it turned out, was never about being flawless enough to be chosen. It was about someone finally looking hard enough to see you and choosing to stay. The end.